Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to AC Always Connected, How to Start a Podcast. I'm Leanne. I'm the events programmer for the AC Hub. We are joined today by Algonquin College alumni, Ryan Mullen. AC Always Connected is a new online event series that keeps our entire Algonquin College community connected. Before we get started, we're going to share a couple of housekeeping items. We kindly ask you to keep your microphone muted during the presentation. However, we encourage you to keep your camera on for some face-to-face time. Along the bottom of the screen, you will find a button entitled Chat. When you select this option, a pop-up window appears on the right-hand side of your screen. Throughout Ryan's presentation, we welcome you to ask questions by typing in the chat, and I will read it out loud on your behalf. So to kick off today's event, we would like everyone to now open the chat tab along the bottom of the screen. In a couple of seconds, I'm going to give everyone a fun question to answer. And we'd like everyone to answer their question by typing in the chat, but please wait to press send until I say so, because we're all going to send our answers at the same time. So the question is, what is your favorite podcast? So we'll type it in the chat, but please wait to press send. Okay, if everyone's had a chance to type their answer, I'm going to count down from 3 and we'll all press send at the same time. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. That's awesome, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing. Our AC Always Connected events always start with an engaging question. So now I'd like to welcome Ryan, who is an Algonquin College alumni of the Broadcasting Television program. He works for the AC Hub, directing, producing, and editing videos for student support services. He is a huge podcast fan and has produced 5 different podcasts in the past 5 years, hosting 2 of them himself. The podcasts vary in style, from conversational to a silly improv show to an informational podcast with the Lung Cancer Canada. Ryan, over to you to share your expertise on how to start a podcast.
Thanks, Leanne. That was such a great intro. Appreciate that. So yeah, I guess it's on sharing my screen time. So share screen and get this set up. All right, that's all going now. You can all see that. It's good, cool. Okay, so yes, as Leanne said, I'm a huge podcast fan, and by listening to so many podcasts, I have started doing my own podcasts, and I was doing them for fun. I was doing them just to do them with my friends to have a good show, and then I would tell my friends and family that I was doing a podcast, and they would tell other people that I was doing a podcast. And one person, a doctor I know, wanted to start doing a podcast. So my friend and colleague Sophia Boris said, "Hey, why don't you get Ryan Mullen to work on your podcast, to produce and edit it?" And so then I started getting paid to do the Lung Cancer Canada podcast. And it's just pretty cool to see how you can just have something that's a fun hobby to something where you can actually get some monetary value and still have a good time doing it. And there's like a great cause going to it. It's not just silly like all my other shows. So yeah, just wanted to kind of go through how you can just make your own thing and you can do whatever you want with your podcast. That's the best thing about podcasts, is you can make it any subject you want, any idea, kind of like a documentary. You could do it about anything you're really interested in. So, okay, there we go. So here are just a lot of the main kind of podcasts that I find, but there's so many different genres and types of ways you could do it. But I find the most common are interviews and conversations. They're like hybrids of the two, where it's usually one person. My main podcast style, I wrote Comedy Bang Bang. I saw in there was Joe Rogan Experience. Some person said, yeah, you'd never listen to a podcast, you don't even have any idea. Well, there's so many different types of things. It could really be whatever you want. But in the for the most part, the people have an interview, but it's like a long form conversation, usually an hour long, I would say. But some people go on for 2 hours, 3 hours. They really vary. Some podcasts are 10 minutes. They really can vary depending on whatever the person, the creators want. There are solo podcasts. Some people, I know Bill Burr has a podcast where he just basically kind of just rambles on and reads the newspaper. And I guess some people find that meditative. You get to just really hear a lot of one person kind of go on. And I find that's all right in the background. It's not really my kind of thing, but really it's, if you find a personality that you really like, people can connect to just you talking to yourself. There's informational podcasts. That's, for example, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. That's one of my friends listens to, where they're like sometimes 9-hour long podcasts about one single battle in a lot of detail. And maybe it's just like a lot of history info, where she actually can't listen to that in the background like most podcasts. She said you have to kind of just sit down and really take in all the information, because they can be a lot, but you can learn all about history. There's review type podcasts where people just talk about whatever movie or TV show they watch, so that can have a built-in fan base of whoever watches the same shows or movies or media. There's fictional podcasts where people have stories where they make up characters and have a lot of acting. I think improv is probably my favorite. I wrote Comedy Bang Bang is my favorite podcast, and that's an improv podcast where people come on and they play characters. And they usually have like a base background idea of what they're gonna do, but they find out on the spot what they do. And those can be very funny just to have crazy moments. There's repurposed content, which is TV shows, kind of like the Daily Show with Trevor Noah might repurpose their TV show as just a podcast. So you just hear the audio. So if someone can't watch their show, they're like, hey, you can still get our content while you're driving to work or going for a walk. And then there's video podcasts. I find video podcasts can be sometimes good and bad. If someone has a video podcast where it's just kind of filming themselves, usually in the studio where they're doing the podcast, it can be helpful to see sometimes the visuals that they're seeing and maybe some expressions that are going on. But it usually takes away from the audio listeners whenever someone they kind of forget about the audio fan base and they just focus on the people watching. So I find video podcast really should just even not even have the audio on. I don't know why they do this, but you can really do whatever you want. Okay, so here I find you should try to be an expert or a detective when you're deciding what type of genre you want to go for, what kind of topic you want to talk about in your podcast. I find you want to be, if you want to pick a subject that you really care about and know a lot about, that you already are obsessed about and talk about all the time. Pick something that you really don't pick something that you think other people will like. That you want something that you can really focus on, that you care about, and you can spend all these hours on, because you already do. And you want to be kind of like a detective where you just want to learn as much as you can about it. So have guests on from different areas of whatever field or fields you're into, and really try to learn as much as you can. I say research is the biggest thing that can help you. Some people can just do a podcast off the cuff. I find having a lot of like kind of just in case the conversation doesn't really go anywhere, have a good place to go off the cuff. You have like a backup base. So this is the favorite pieces slide. So I find I try to copy the same style of my favorite director, and that's Quentin Tarantino. I find he's such a great film director and creator because he is just such a film nerd. He's just such a big fan of movies, and he's seen every movie. That when he's making his own movies, he takes his favorite bits and pieces from all of his movies. He'll grab like an actor from here, he'll grab a shot from there, some music from here, an angle from there, all these little bits, and he combines them into like a mega movie, which is just all these great references that when an average viewer doesn't even know there's all these like taken things, but he's taken them from all these obscure movies or concepts. And so that's what I try to do with my podcasts or anything I work on is I take the way I like my intros. That's how I do my intros for my podcast. So I do them quick. Whenever I hear a podcast that has 10-minute long intros, I just get bored and I skip. You can skip ahead on podcasts. You can go 15 seconds ahead, 15 seconds ahead, 15 seconds ahead. And I just skip until I hear the guest come on. Because when I clicked on the podcast to hear the guest, I saw their name in the title. But that's why I follow that method. I try to do it in a quick minute. When you listen to my podcast, I'll have like a minute synopsis of what the podcast is going to be about. And then we're going to get right into the guest. Or if it's a musical guest, you know that on my podcast we'll play a song beforehand, just because that's the style that I've built around. And then for like the research part, I do my research like I like my research done in my favorite shows. So I love Hot Ones and I love Nardwuar, and these are shows that have so much research done that the most common response from guests is like, "Oh, how'd you know that? Like that's crazy. I love that. Like, do you know my whole family?" And when people really appreciate the question and they really are excited to talk about the subject, that they don't hear it in every interview that they do, it can really make such a better story. They want to talk about the subject instead of just the same thing over and over again. And so when you do a lot of research, you can really find the way I do my research is I listen to a lot of the guests if they are on other podcasts or other shows. And then I listen to their answers and I make them my own questions. So they've already answered that question a million times. So I try to come up with what's my own creative way of basing it. I come to the question with their thing already existing, and then I come up with a way to go off that. So if someone says their favorite musician is Queen, then I'm like, in my podcast, they've already answered their favorite musician's Queen. In my podcast, I say, I know your favorite musician's Queen. What's your favorite Queen song? And so that way they've already answered the first question. That's already done. And now they're just jumping in. My favorite Queen song, you already know that. They feel like they've been seen. I already know something about them. And so that's how I do my style of that. And then I end my podcast in the way that I've seen other people end their shows. Like Craig Ferguson's, when he was hosting the Late Late Show, he ended his podcast by getting the guests to choose how they want to end. And so I do the same thing. My guests choose how I end, but I have a different way to end. I don't get my guests to do harmonicas or throw frisbees like he did. My guests do different things. So it's still my own thing, but I'm taking his format and making it my own. And that's how you should find just your favorite mediums, your favorite styles of your own shows that you like, and just kind of make them your own unique mega show. That's all your favorite pieces. Okay, so titles. You want your show to be easily pronounceable, easily searchable, memorable, and flow nicely. On the left, you can see the Cassandre Chronicles. That was the first podcast I did. And I really like that podcast, but we made a lot of mistakes, and that's just what you have to do sometimes with your first project is just, you have to, that's where the best time to make all the mistakes. So let's look what was wrong with it. So easily pronounceable. We spent a lot of time trying to come up with a title for this podcast, and my friend Jeffrey, that's him in the picture, his name's Jeffrey Cassandre. That's not a very common last name. So people didn't know how to pronounce it. I've heard him pronounce it two different ways. Cassandre. People that have been on the podcast didn't know how to pronounce it. So that was not great. Easily searchable. People don't know how to pronounce it. They don't know how to search for it either. So people had a hard time searching for it. We also misspelled Chronicles just so it would go with the K. So that made it hard to find. There's a lot of mistakes in this one that I was like, oh, okay, yeah, we should not have done that. It just seemed kind of cool at the time. I think it's memorable if you finally understand it, if you can finally comprehend it. And I think it flowed nicely because of the alliteration. I think that's the best thing going for it was the Cassandre Chronicles. Kind of like at the top I have Motive for Murder. These are just examples of some of the top podcasts. And so I'll go through some of their titles in a bit. But I have this picture of the Joe Rogan Experience there. And so that's actually a really good one. A little backstory on how I learned about this podcast. I've actually started doing stand-up comedy because I've started listening to so many podcasts, and I kind of learned the ins and outs of how to do stand-up by listening to so many comedians talk. And that when you just kind of learn inside baseball, I believe it's referred to as, to really learn just so much about a subject that you wouldn't normally hear. I did that with stand-up, and I met a comedian, and he said he had a podcast that had 1 million downloads. I was like, what is your podcast? And he said it's called the Joe Rogan Experience. And I was like, what does that mean? And he explained that they review the past week's episode of Joe Rogan podcast. They talk about the subjects and what was going on. So the title is genius because people are already searching for the Joe Rogan Experience. Joe Rogan has so many followers. Now they look for the Joe Rogan Experience, and what pops up? The Joe Rogan Experience also pops up. So they have a built-in fan base for people that are already into that fan base that want to see more Joe Rogan content or thoughts on it. I told a friend of mine about this, and he told me he'd already listened to it and did not know they were an Ottawa podcast. And so that is just a perfect example of how, if you want to title something that has a built-in audience, you got to think of creative ways like that. Let's go down the list and kind of talk about some of the different styles that I think I'd seen one person, Meg Fraser, had said Unlocking Us with Brene Brown. I think that was your favorite podcast. So that one's pretty good because it kind of has the alliteration like Motive for Murder and Cassandre Chronicles, where it's just the you and the you. And then it has the person's name with it. Sometimes people do that. I think that is good to have like the name in it with it. Unlike Joe Rogan Experience, where he has his name, people would probably think it's based off of nothing, but it's actually something he's created that off of the Jimi Hendrix Experience, which is one of his favorite, I guess, inspirations. So he has his title based off that. And I think you have Motive for Murder. Again, the alliteration, people know what it is based off the title. That's a pretty good name for a podcast. You're like, what is, it's going to be crime based, like Crime Junkies. I don't agree with the bottom title, My Favorite Murder. I think that should just kind of be My Favorite Murder. That's all of the only way I've heard it referred to as, kind of like Unlocking Us with Brene Brown. I bet no one calls it the whole title, Unlocking Us with Brene Brown, but they just call it Unlocking Us. And like My Favorite Murder with Karen Kilgariff, and I'm sorry, I actually can't see the whole the whole name. My screen's blocking. And Georgia Hardstark. I find that's just way too much content. You'll see kind of on their thumbnail, it's way too many words to search up. Here, we'll go to the next topic. Equipment. Equipment is obviously the most important part of a podcast is being able to actually get it out there. There's a lot of aspects of equipment that, like, the core aspects you're going to need are microphones and headphones and editing software. And as you go along with committing to doing a podcast, I think the best way is to kind of start cheaper and then sell your equipment, and then slowly grow as you get more into it. Don't jump to something that's very expensive right away, because that will not help you if you just think you're going to be into podcasting for a week and then you spend so much money on something that you don't even know how to use. Like, if you buy the most expensive thing and you don't know how to use it, what's the point? Some people will hire engineers, they're called, so people that just work on the podcast and don't speak. But again, that costs money. So if you're trying to do a podcast, you're probably going to have to learn how to do every aspect yourself, because you're just doing it for fun by yourself. And eventually maybe you can grow a team and you can eventually hire people. You can see I have cameras here, and this is a Zoom recorder. So these are different ways that you can do your podcast. The most simplest way, I would say, is getting a microphone, kind of like the one that I have here. This is a Snowball. This is like on the cheaper end for something that's good quality. I made the mistake when I was younger. I would tell my parents, like, if they were trying to get me like a gift, that like for like my birthday or Christmas, I wanted a microphone, but I didn't know what kind of microphone I wanted. They didn't know what kind of microphone that I wanted. So they would get me something that was cheap and not what was proper for this type of project. So I would say, if you're really trying to commit to something, if you get I think these prices are around this. You could probably find them for maybe even cheaper if they're used. But I think they're around this price. I would say they're just so great because it's just a USB plug-in. So you just need your computer, you plug it in, and you're able to get started. You don't need a whole bunch. This is all you need to do a solo podcast. You get 2 of them, and you have yourself and a guest with just a Snowball. Then you can upgrade to the Yeti. It's double the price. It's much better, but this is just something, if you're trying to really get into this, these are some of the things that I see a lot of professional podcasters use. This is what I have since upgraded to. I spent a couple years with this setup, and it worked really well. But one thing that's a problem with this setup is the bass. The bass of the Snowball is it's on the table. So when you're talking to guests, and usually I'm talking to guests that have never been on a podcast before, they don't realize how much they're speaking with their hands, and they might tap the table a bunch, and then you have to kind of warn people, like, hey, like, you're going to tap the table and we'll try to tell you to stop. But they're like, no, I won't. And then they get really into a story, and they're slamming the table, and they're really banging. They don't even realize they're doing it. They're so into the story, and you're like, hey, stop. But so that's one of the issues with that. So my current setup, I'll show you. I have a microphone that is handheld. It's not wireless. You would actually plug a cable into the bottom, and then I plug it into the Zoom H6 Handy recorder. So this setup is a little bit more, I'm a little bit more invested at this point. This setup, I've found several of my favorite podcasts use this exact thing, and they're ones that are getting, huge followings that you can see on like charts. That so if one of your favorite podcasts or producers or using equipment you're using, I think that's a good start. And I see these microphones on several like Netflix specials, and I'm like, oh, that's amazing to see the thing I'm using here that you can just get at your store down the street. I think I might have got it at Dave's Drum Shop. I'm not sure, but like I think I got that Shure microphone for like $90 actually. So that's like a price you could find online, but you can get them for cheaper. They're so sturdy. I have 3 of them. I'm gonna buy another one. You can plug 4 of them into the Zoom H6. On the sides, you can just plug in XLR cables, which you could probably get for $12, $13 each, and they vary in length. So it is very handy, like it says. Just fits in your hand. You can manipulate the audio of each dial, as you see here, of each person. So if one person's louder, you can turn them down. One person's quieter, turn them up specifically. You do that on the spot. I had the Zoom H4 beforehand. It's the cheaper one. It definitely was not as good, and I had to upgrade to this as fast as I could. The microphone at the top here is if you're trying to have more of a reporting style where maybe it doesn't matter how great the audio quality is, like speaking specifically into the microphone. But if you're just trying to capture the content, like if you're doing an article and you're just trying to make sure everything is recorded, you can just have the person speaking into a microphone like this at the top of it. One thing you're going to realize when you work on a podcast like this and you're with people that haven't talked in a while on microphones is how they're speaking into it. So when you're using a microphone like a snowball, you might think just because it's set up like I have it set up that it's okay because you're hearing me, but you really want people to get it close, like really close to them at what's called eating the mic. And you can really tell a difference because this is how it's meant. It's meant to be picking up exactly everything at this distance. So everyone, it's just picking up me. If someone's across the table from me, and they have their microphone right up close to them, we're going to be the main targets of it. For a project like this, I'm talking to you guys. It's okay if it's back there, but people are not going to want to speak into the microphone. They're probably going to have it set up in front of them, and you're going to tell them to start here, and they're going to slowly throughout the process of the podcast get further away, and you're going to have to keep reminding them to go back because they just find it uncomfortable. And I think the best way to describe it is tell them to be uncomfortably close to the microphone, and this is going to be the best way to pick it up. And let's speak into microphones. For editing software.
Sorry, Rye, we do have a question in the chat related to sound. So there's an attendee who's wondering, when they listen to YouTube interviews, the sound is off par. How do you calibrate the sound so that both people emit the same, I don't know that word, the same range?
Yeah, I think
like not having one guest super loud and the other you can barely hear.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And probably one of the hardest aspects of podcasting is trying to make those levels as even as possible. I would say there are some software you can look at that I think they're called equalizers, or you can look into something like that where you can just drop the files in and they do their best job. It's to try to even it out. I have found them to work sometimes. I generally find just manually kind of maybe you can make a specific file soloed, so you just hear one audio at a time, and maybe try to get that one to one specific level, usually minus 12 dB, and then get the other file soloed, and then you make that one get to minus 12 dB, and then hopefully they're around the same level, and you try your best. Really, I hear so many professional shows like on Netflix that aren't evenly leveled sometimes, and you're like, how is this out there? It's just hard to do sometimes, and you just try your best.
Does each speaker having their own microphone when it's being recorded assist with this as well?
Definitely. Yeah. Each person having their own specific track will be the main way to help. Like I had said with specifically with this Zoom, you could just see here, you could change the dial and the level of the person. So you could do that with a snowball or a Yeti where you each person talks into it at a base level, but the person, maybe for a specific person, like I had said, you put the microphone here, maybe if one person's really loud, maybe that's a case where you get them to go a little bit further back. You kind of work around each person the best you can. In editing, you are able to manipulate it up and down, but it's a lot of tweaking and adjusting that can be difficult to get to be perfect, but you just have to keep trying. So that's actually where I was actually. It was for editing software. So I've Googled on the left there different free editing software. I'm not sure what the best, which of those are the best, because I mainly use the ones on the right in the Adobe software. But I'm guessing there have to be some out there that. But if you're really committed, you probably, hopefully, you can have a student pricing where if you're in a creative program, or you have $50 a month for these products that are you get the entire package for the $50 a month, and it's definitely worth it. On the left is Audition, and this is a program that's mainly used for audio, and so that's what I started editing my podcast in. I was like, oh well, this program is mainly for audio, so this is the best way to do it. But as a video editor, I actually know the one on the right. I know Premiere Pro way more because that's what I use for videos. So I've actually started editing my podcast in Premiere Pro because it's already what I know. So if you're already more familiar with something, maybe just stick to whatever you already kind of know best and do it your own creative way. I've learned a lot just from colleagues, like other ISS fellow coworkers that do similar things, like tips and tricks on what they do, and you can find a lot of things on lynda.com and on YouTube too.
Great.
So
Sorry, Rye. We just have one more question in the chat. Sure. Someone's wondering if you're doing virtual interviews. So if you're interviewing someone over a platform such as this, so you're not able to bring out your special microphone. Is there a best way to go about it?
The best way, I think you just have to kind of accept and maybe say off the top that this is over Zoom, and have the person accept that that person is going to record from their end, and that's going to be how it sounds. You really can't change it too much. You can get the file and adjust it, the quality based off of volume, but you probably can't take out a lot of the tinniness. If someone's really into your podcast and wants to listen to it, they'll accept that. Sometimes I've heard people have podcasts on airplanes, and you just like, oh, this podcast on an airplane. That's why it sounds like there's noise in the background of people talking. And that's what my podcast is, called Odd Spots. And I do it in different places. And I kind of tell people up front, I'm in this place. You might hear these things. So if someone's on Zoom, you can tell them to record their end, and it'll be through their whatever microphone they have capable. That's not what you have, and that's okay. People just have to kind of accept what it is. And I think that's one of the interesting things of podcasts too, is my favorite ones are like the rawest, the ones that are least edited, and you're hearing real moments of people's phones ringing, and you're hearing these kind of things that are just not fully polished. And that's something that that I find is the best part of kind of like what the best YouTube videos are. It's someone that's doing this just by themselves. It's not a whole company. It's which one person's concept all being executed by them. And they're trying their best. And so test episodes, I always try to do at least 3 test episodes. And I actually learned this method of doing test episodes from a podcast. I've learned a lot of things from podcasts, and this is just one of them. I always do 3, at least 3. Sometimes I do 4, sometimes I do 5. And it really helps me make the product and project that I'm really trying to do. So usually I come up with a base concept, and I think I know how things are going to go. And I think I know who my guests are going to be. And then I don't ask those guests to come on. Instead, I ask some of my close friends that I wouldn't probably have actually as my first guests. And I ask them. And so I tell them, we're just going to do a test episode. No one's going to listen to it. Just going to be us. I'm comfortable because it's my friends. They're just having a good, fun time playing around with my microphones and having a weird time. And then we get to tweak out the concepts. We get to tweak out like the formatting. I'm like, oh, we'll see what works, see what doesn't. If I thought this style or this way of asking questions or this game or whatever concept or segments you're trying to do, see if they work. If they don't, try it again in the next test episode. Third one, maybe try different maneuvers or things or styles. And by the time you're doing your first episode, people think it's your first episode. It's actually your 4th. So you've had all this practice. You can practice editing all that stuff that you were testing with, see how the levels work, see how the editing software works, see the music that you want to put in or the different sounds or whatever different effects you want to do. You can really learn a lot by having things that you know, and what you're telling your guests is they're just tests. They're not going yet. So you can really be as free and loose as possible to see what your show can be. I think test episodes are very important. I do it for every project or series, not every most like things that I'm really trying to take seriously. Scheduling, this is the pre-production aspect, and it's the least fun, but it has to be done. So first, when you're like most podcasts, that's what I'm kind of going to base this off of, is usually finding a guest. Because usually the way people find podcasts is by looking for a guest or just being interested of who the other person would be on. And then after you listen to a bunch of guests on a podcast, then you kind of get to learn the host a little bit more. And that's usually the way people find podcasts. Or you just really like the host and you want to hear the host talk to anyone. It really varies. But finding a guest, I find you really want to find a person that you want to talk to. You don't want to find a person that just has a lot of followers or you think people will want to listen to. I think if you're not into the conversation, then why should anyone listen to it? Like, you want to find someone that you actually want to hang out with and learn from or have a good time with. And then other people will too. And they're fly on the wall to your conversation that they would not have normally been part of. Asking a guest to be on your podcast can be intimidating sometimes. Sometimes you just don't want to, you don't know if you're wasting people's time or what they think, if they want to be in your, what they think of your project or how it would go if you're just nervous. But I found the best way to do it is just, I sometimes ask people whenever I see them, like if we're like laughing, having a good time, I'm like, hey, I have a podcast. Would you want to be a guest? And they're like, yeah, sure. And then a couple days later, I just follow up in a text or on Facebook or something. And I say, hey, so if you're still down to come on the podcast, when in the next couple weeks works for you? And then I'm letting them have the most freedom of when is best for them. And we're doing it on like best terms. So your guest is going to be happy, which is what you want. You want them to be happy with the product and be having the best mood that they can. And you have to be okay with rejection. I have asked some guests to be on my podcast 4 or 5 times and they keep saying no. And I have to accept that whatever reason that they might not want to come on my podcast is okay. But I told them, I want them to be on my podcast and I'm going to keep asking you. So just so you know, and maybe eventually after the 10th time, they'll say yes and they'll come on the podcast and maybe we'll talk about the whole process of getting them on the podcast. Who knows? But hopefully we get the person and they like accept that you keep wanting them on if you just keep asking. Choosing a time for everyone that works. This is one of the things that matters. It depends on how big your crew is. So if it's just you doing the podcast, and it's just you doing the levels of like monitoring the audio, and just you talking with one guest, that's 2 people's schedules. But if you have 2 hosts, that's 3 schedules. If you have 3, I've seen podcasts with 3 hosts, that's 3 people's schedules, and the guest has 4 schedules, depending on how many guests you want to, like, it's just a lot. It could be a lot if you're trying to have a podcast, which is, again, typically an hour to an hour and a half, I would say, on average. And just it's a time commitment that you have to find for a lot of people, which can be difficult. And then rescheduling, that's just another part of it. Sometimes people reschedule on the day of because they're sick, and I think you just have to accept that. They're like, is it okay if we do that? But you have to always say yes, because if you're like, no, I planned on doing it today, it's like, well, the person might be sick or just not feeling good, and so you're not going to get them in their best headspace. So you want your guests to be as best in their best mood as possible. And the same thing with cancellation. Some people are so down and they have the right and ability to say no ultimately, which if it happened last minute, you did all this research and you were so much prep, and then they're like, I'm too nervous, I don't want to do it, or they just don't want to be on it for whatever reason. You just have to kind of accept it and move on and find someone else for your next episode and get started on the next one. Okay. Recording. So the time frame for the guest and the audience, like I said, usually I find them to be an hour to an hour and a half. Some podcasts you'll find are 2 hours. Some are 3. That can be intimidating for some people just to see, because they're like, I'm not going to listen to that whole thing. But for me, I just see it as I'll have that on in the background while I'm doing something. I don't even have to listen to the whole 2 or 3 hours in one sitting. I could just have it on for 15 minutes at a time and keep coming back to it every time I keep editing photos, or every time I keep going for a walk or whatever I'm doing. I just can have it in the background. So I don't really mind that. But some people get intimidated by that. I find some of the best conversations happen 2.5 hours in, because that's when people are really into their conversation. It can really vary from podcast to podcast. When I first, again, coming back to the Cassandra Chronicles, I can't even say it. We did it for as long as we wanted. We were big fans of the Joe Rogan Experience. I think I saw someone said that was their favorite. We liked the long conversations, but Jeffrey, he was not a professional, and so he did not know how to do it as well as someone who's been speaking into a microphone like Joe Rogan or whatever entertainer for so long. When it's just someone doing it at this level, maybe stick to an hour, maybe stick to like a specific amount of time. And that's what I've actually learned when I saw a local Ottawa podcast, Scene Partners, a couple friends of mine in there. Their podcast was like sometimes 40 minutes to an hour. And I was like, 40 minutes? I can just listen to that in one sitting. That's easy. That just made me want to listen to it more, because I was just like, that's easier than a 3-hour podcast. So I actually took that from them, seeing like they were like 44 minutes. So that's why I try to get my podcast. I'm like around 50 minutes. I'll try wrapping up, and it'll be an hour. It really, I'd say, try to keep it low for the guest. The audio, it makes it, the lower time frame you have, then the least editing you have to do. Like there's a lot of good reasons to have a shorter, like, what's the saying? Less is more. Sometimes some of my favorite podcasts have been 10 hours long. What am I saying? It varies. It really varies. Location. The location of, again, professional podcasts are in sound recording studios that have soundproof rooms. When you're at a level where you're just doing it for fun and you're doing it in your living room and it's like your friends and family and a low amount of people at the beginning listening, you can just have it in your living room. People know there's going to be cars driving by, and it, like I said, as long as you kind of give a point of reference as to where you are, that's all that matters. And the people will accept the sounds that go by and just care about the conversation and the topic that you're trying to do, and not care about whatever happens there. Letting the guests know that they can edit things out. I think this is actually one of the most important things that I've done before some episodes start. And I always try to remember is letting the guests know that they have complete control of the final product. You want them to be as comfortable as possible. And if you tell them this, then they know that they can be free and loose and cut something out. Like maybe they say something and they look back and they're like, oh, I think what I was saying might be misconstrued in a specific way. And I didn't want it to be interpreted that way. Can you take that out? And I'm like, oh, I didn't think of it that way, but you're right. If you're uncomfortable with the situation, you can take it out. Or if someone says someone's name and they're like, I don't think that person would have liked my name there, you can beep out the person's name. Like you want to make sure your guest is comfortable with what they're having out there, because they did you the favor of coming on the podcast, giving you their time, being an episode of content that hopefully was a good time. And so you want to make sure they are happy. And if you just tell them beforehand, like usually like radio programs where you're not allowed to swear, if you tell them, hey, don't say these specific things up front, then they'll be thinking about those things and they're not going to be in the best headspace for how to be comfortable and flowing properly. Actively listening while prepping is something you have to do while you're doing your podcast, which is kind of difficult. It's kind of difficult to do two things at once, but I find it to be really important, where you have to be, when you've asked your guest a question, you have to be listening to what they're saying, kind of like follow up on interesting parts of the story and be listening to what they're saying. But you also, if they're kind of done, if their topic ends after whatever they say, you have to be ready to go to the next thing. So you need to be focusing on what they're saying and going down different routes of, I'd say like tangents. That's the best way of like, I find those that can be interesting, like just different ways. Or you have to be, and you also have to be prepped with notes to be like, okay, I also, if I don't want any dead air. So if this person's done this topic, where are we going to go to next? You have to kind of be looking at your notes. Also, I find you have to be giving eye contact and be kind of doing a lot. Like they know you're paying attention to what's going to happen next, but you want to be doing a lot of things and making sure they're comfortable with you and you know what you're going and you know what you're doing and you're running the show. And again, like the person that asked before, monitoring audio, you definitely want headphones in when you're doing your show, because if you can't hear the sound of it, then how can you be confident that it's even being recorded if you don't see the red light? You want to be making sure that's going on, or else it could be all a waste. Um, if you're not listening, it could be unplugged. There could be a weird sound because something's going on. You're like, oh, maybe we should take this somewhere else or not do this now because there is construction for an hour and this is going to be horrible. If I've actually, yeah, I'd say definitely wear headphones every time and try to adjust it as best as possible. So it's not peaking, which means like being too loud. So it's going to be hurting people's ears. Very important.
Before we move on, Rye, there's actually a couple questions in the chat. So the first one is, how much do you edit out parts of conversation?
That's actually exactly where we are right now. Perfect timing. So editing out parts like ums and sniffs and pauses and mic bumps, I think it really is at the editor's discretion. Like I said, sometimes I really like the moments of a podcast that are raw, that are like really happening, or oh, this is just cool to hear the kind of behind the scenes of something. Like when you hear someone come into a podcast, they don't even know they're recording, and you hear them like coughing or whatever, that can be kind of interesting. But ultimately, you don't want to hear like somebody hitting a mic by accident. It's easier just to take that out. Sometimes the long pauses, you're like, oh, it's hard though, because you want to take out the long pause because you want the listener to be having something going on. But sometimes the pause is important depending on what the conversation is. Sometimes it's a serious conversation. The pause is the person's really thinking. It's taking them that long. Like sometimes you want to hear how long it takes someone to say something, and I think it can really vary. Because sometimes I've cut things down too much when I'm like, it doesn't sound natural anymore, because I've been chopping it up. I've been taking out all these things that again, it makes it better, like not having all these sniffs and sneezes. But sometimes don't take out too many. Maybe leave a couple. Take out as many as you can, but leave the odd thing.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, it reads, how long between recording and editing and broadcast? So I think the person asking the question is kind of looking for like a timeline. How long does it take you to get a podcast from the recording to the finished product?
That really depends on your release schedule. And so some people release a podcast weekly. Some people do it daily. Some people, my first one, I did it bi-weekly. Release schedules are really important to give you like a reason to do it, and like a time frame where you're like, oh, we got to get it done in this amount of time. So you like get to like to find guests and stuff. Sometimes you record a bunch of them. Like say, for example, when I was doing bi-weekly, we recorded sometimes 3 in a week. So that means we were backed up. We had them recorded sometimes 2 of them in one day, and then we'd have those saved for 2 weeks. So that really varies on release. You could, in theory, record it and upload it right away. But my current method right now is I've actually taken the Netflix kind of style of I release my podcast whenever I want. And I release them in batches of 5 based off of themes. So I'm like, it's not every week. People don't expect that all the time, but every now and then it's like, oh, what a surprise. Now here are 5 episodes of 5 hours. Here's 5 hours of music related podcasts or movie related podcasts or comedy related podcasts. Like I've just kind of taken this style. I haven't seen it done before. So I just think people like binging things and would be into something like that. So I think it really varies depending on how you want to format your release schedule. Again, there's so much creative freedom, and that's the best thing about a podcast is you can have your like daily job where you have to listen to the goals of your company and what you should be doing properly. But when you have your own show, like a podcast, you can do whatever you want. You're your own boss, and you can have friends and family that listen to it and they give you suggestions on what to do, but you can take those or not. Maybe they're great suggestions. Hey, great idea, Aunt Carol. I will do that. Or no, that's Mom. I'm not doing it that way, Mom. This is my podcast. Why are you even listening? Something's not for moms. This is just for me and my friends. But like it really varies. I would say like you could do whatever you want. Testing on different devices is another part of editing that after I export it, then you have to do several different things when you're editing. I usually edit with my headphones in. You also have to edit without headphones to kind of listen to what it's like in speakers. People listen on so many different types of devices. Then I have my file and I export it and I put it on my phone. Then I listen to it on my other headphones while I'm on a walk to see what it sounds like when I'm on the bus listening to it. So I kind of do like extensive testing and maybe overdo it, but you really, again, you could just have it done and release it, and who knows? It's however confident you are with your product. RSS feeds. RSS feeds are the timeline of your podcast. So to get a podcast uploaded, you have to have it on a base website like SoundCloud or Podbean. I'm going to use SoundCloud as an example because that's what I use, but I'll also explain some of the difficulties I've had with it. So what I have to do is upload something onto SoundCloud, and then it has something called an RSS feed. You take the RSS feed and then you go to a platform like iTunes and you say, I want to create a podcast. And then iTunes asks you for an RSS feed. You paste the RSS feed from SoundCloud. iTunes looks at it. Somebody there checks it over to see if it's appropriate or what the content is. And then after sometimes a day or two of you waiting and wondering if you're going to get accepted into this iTunes club, they pass you or not based off of a variety of things. Sometimes it's your artwork style or title or the file or the link. I've been canceled on my submissions several times, and it's so wonderful when you finally get accepted. Your thing's up on iTunes or Spotify. And so Spotify, I just recently learned. So I was mainly doing SoundCloud, and then also so what happens is when you have it on SoundCloud, it goes up to iTunes automatically. Wherever your RSS feed is, that's your base timeline, and everything you have on there just gets copied over to iTunes because it's taken from the base of the SoundCloud website. So everything you change on there will be changed on iTunes. When you upload the podcast, it gets uploaded to the other places too. And so what I've learned is that when you have a SoundCloud account, that's one of the only base websites that will not upload your podcast to Spotify. I had to personally send an email complaining about how I couldn't do that, and someone helped me amongst the way, and I have my podcast on Spotify. But I think you're supposed to go through Podbean or a bunch of other websites. You can Google which websites RSS feeds do you need to go on Spotify, and there's a whole list of them, and SoundCloud wasn't one of them. And I was like, what are you talking about? You can, like what's happened to me, you can find your workarounds depending on who you talk to, I guess, through certain emails and help emails. One issue though is SoundCloud and Podbean have only a certain amount of time where they are free. You can only upload a couple hours of free content. It's usually, I think SoundCloud is mainly made for music. So you only have a couple hours of free content, and then that's your limit. A good podcast keeps, I find, all of its library up there for forever. And so you can just listen to all the old episodes. You can listen to episode 1 10 years from now. That's my favorite kind of podcast, where the entire library is just available. And so you can't do that on a free account. You have to have a pro unlimited access account, which is $180 a year. If you're a couple people on the podcast, if you're a duo, again, that you split that amongst the two of you. I find it's worth it. I have my unlimited. I get what I want. It's when you just do it month to month. This is just one of my hobbies and things I do, and it's worth it to me because I can just listen to these fun conversations I've had with my friends or silly adventures. Yeah, that's how that's set up. It's kind of complicated. It took me a lot of Googling and figuring out how to do all this. If you have any questions, I think my information's up there, and I can try to send you some guide. It's kind of complicated, but this is the best info I could find. Cover art. Your cover art, you have to remember, is mainly going to be seen on your phone. So it's going to be kind of small when you're looking at it. So it's actually not going to be this big usually when someone's checking it and looking for what the podcast is. I find it to be pretty important to have a graphic designer. I'm very lucky that my best friend is a graphic designer. So we kind of trade services where I tell him I'll film a video or take photos for him, and he'll design my podcast logo. So maybe if you want to find some kind of deal, like trade you could do like that with someone, or just hire a graphic designer and they will help hopefully bring your vision come to life, because they know it better than you do. And if you try doing it, it probably will not look anywhere near as good as some of these. So some of them are pretty to the point where this one's about Joe Rogan, just like is the name of the podcast. Let's just have his face on it. Same with Office Ladies. You're wondering which Office Ladies are on there. It's these two. Like, it's very helpful. Just this is who it is. My Favorite Murder is a really good one. It's right to the point. Actually, I said there was a lot of words earlier. I still think that is a lot, but the style of it is good because it smashes the theme properly of serial killer-ish murders letters. I really like this one, The Lab Happiness. I've actually never heard of this podcast except for looking for logos, and I saw this one, and it really stood out to me. It matches the theme perfectly. Like, it was just very well designed of matching, the theme perfectly. I actually have to move to this. Can't really see. You got The Daily. I think that one, again, matches its theme really well. Seems like a news organization. It's pretty simple. Isn't showing too much. Just the name of it and a logo. You Made It Weird. That's one of my favorite podcasts. With Pete Holmes. So that one, it's a weird in the title. It's going to be a weird design. And then the bottom ones are ones I actually kind of think you might want to avoid. So problems. In the bottom left, ID 10T is what Chris Hardwick's podcast is now called. It looks like it says idiot. That's what it's supposed to look like. But it's actually pronounced ID 10T. I think that is very difficult for people to explain and kind of what's going on. I think the pictures kind of goes well with it, but I think the title is difficult. The conversation piece, I find this to be a rough kind of design and kind of final decision. Like, so I've seen several covers with just a microphone on it, and I find that to be a mistake because every podcast has a microphone. So why are you centralizing that as the main thing? Like, Joe Rogan has one in his, but it's not the center part. Some people might not even know there was a microphone. This microphone is the only thing here, so it doesn't really tell you a lot. And the conversation piece, again, I find most podcasts are conversations, so it's kind of not, it doesn't tell you a lot. And again, I don't really find it to be super creative or the best. And then this one, A Mother's Secret, the Lori Vallow story, mystery and murder analysis by Dr. Phil, is just way too much for me to have just said for the title of that podcast. It's just way too many words. It's just so much going on. And then it's also reflected down here to show more words. I think that one needs to be redone also. So yeah, you kind of see sometimes less is more. This one shows me, I'm like, oh, I really want to click on this one. Actually, I still haven't yet because I just have so many podcasts I listen to, but of the ones up here that I haven't listened to, this is the one I click on. Okay. Releasing. So when you're uploading a file to SoundCloud, this is what it looks like. This is an example of one of my files that I had up. So you have the person's name, put the number. You don't have to put the name of your podcast every time because it's just in the base file and the logo can just stay there. And so you could just put the number of the episode and the person's name, the people's names that are in it. Or you can come up with, I find that's the best way to do it, just because people usually go by title. If people try coming up with creative titles like Thanksgiving or who knows, I don't know, like summer fun, and where people are just talking, wherever it's the topic they're talking about, it's hard to have people like want to go on that one because it's just like, what is that all they're doing is just talking about those things? If you just have a person's name, you're like, okay, these are the people on it. That's who I care about more. You have a lot of details like what. The genre, your different tags. I have information and descriptions that kind of show where we are, who the music's by, who the cover art's by. I put that in every time just because I always have the same music, and I think you should probably do that. Just kind of stick to the same themes each time. And then you can have extra, it's called metadata, so you can show that it includes music. And if your content has a swearing, you can also show that as explicit content, and you click yes on that, and then there will be a little E. I actually don't know what happens if you don't click that. I just have done it because I've seen other people do it, and I'm like, I guess I just want to be safe and tell my guests, like I said, they can say what they want. you don't want it to be explicit, you don't have to do that. And then, yeah, having, I guess, usually I like to include a photo. I like to take a picture of me and the guest for when I post on social media, because it kind of shows people like what we were wearing and what it looked like at the time. People get a better idea of the environment. When it comes to listeners, you can actually, these websites show a lot of information. You can see specific people's accounts that are signed, that are logged into SoundCloud, and see who's listening, how many times they listen to it. You see what countries people are listening to from, and like which regions of the country. Like, it's very, very specific info you can get for this, and from like Spotify. And the way that I look at listeners is some episodes get more listens than other ones that I don't expect. And the way that I look at it is, I'm doing it for me and the guest. We are getting the conversation, and it's already a success when we're doing the podcast. And if nobody listens to it, then we at least had that exchange and that good time. And I could listen to the conversation and hear have it again and listen, be like, oh yeah, what a good time. And if other people listen to it, then great. That's the best case, where people tell you that they listen to it and you're like, really, you listened to it, thank you so much, I really appreciate that. What you think about this aspect or that aspect, and they tell you different ways that they thought about your conversation, or ideas and topics, or whatever incident happened, and you can have a kind of new inside joke with you. Is that, I think I have sponsors. This might be the last one. Okay. Yeah, this is the last one, and we're wrapping it up. So sponsors, mainly this is just for large audiences. I find they usually ruin the flow. Some people put sponsors all the way through a show. That just ruins it. If you want to do them, get them out of the way at the beginning. You only want to have sponsors if you have an audience, because then that large audience will go to the products. Like, a certain percentage of them will go to the products. If you have no audience, then no percentage of them will go to the products that you're trying to sell. And then the sponsor won't be giving you money, because you won't be giving them any listeners. It mainly ruins the flow of the show. And you should definitely connect to the values of your show. You don't want to have a sponsor that you wouldn't buy from, and that you don't agree with their morals. Like, that goes with anything money-wise. These are my shows that I worked on. Here's just some of the thumbnails. These three, actually, yeah, I think these three were designed all by my friend Jared, and you can see, like, he started putting his logo on it there, and he probably should have done it sooner. Like, just kind of things that we're learning as we're doing it too. And yeah, I think you definitely see growth, and these are other ones I worked on. So thank you guys so much for listening.
Awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much. There are a couple of great questions in the chat, so we're going to power through those, being cautious of time.
Yeah.
So the first one is, can you recommend a resource for locating local Ottawa podcasts? Do you know of like a website or?
I actually don't know offhand, but I know there are several podcasts. You could just type probably Ottawa Podcast Studio, and there are several around town where you can go and you'll hire an engineer. They'll do all the editing for you, and you pay them the fee for the time and the use of it, but you'll get your product and you don't have to do any of the editing like I had talked about earlier.
Awesome. The next one is, can you recommend a must-listen podcast for newbies?
I would say one of my favorites is You Made It Weird, the one that I posted there with Pete Holmes. That's definitely one of my favorites. I think they say every episode they talk about comedy, sex, and God, and you can really hear a whole lot about a person. They just had Adam Sandler on, and it's just such a good podcast. Definitely recommend that one.
Awesome. And then the next one, there's actually a listener who has started a podcast.
Oh, yeah?
And the theme is what happens after a music festival, like where do the lost items go? And they will be interviewing different areas of the festival, including the bands and musicians.
Okay.
The logo is actually in the chat if you want to open the chat and download it. It's super cute. Her 12-year-old daughter designed it. But she's looking for your feedback. And the name of the podcast is Wobbly and Sway. And she's wondering what you think of that.
That sounds really cool. Yeah, that's awesome. No, actually, I think I'm still sharing my screen, so I'll stop that. And where is it in the chat?
If you scroll up a little bit, not too far,
okay.
It's a nice big message.
Wobbly and Sway. Yeah, I like that title. Definitely. Yeah, it makes me go, what does that mean? Like, what is that? And yeah, that's cool. Um,
Well, thank you so much to the listener who was brave enough to share that with us. There's a
yeah,
lot of great feedback in the chat about the logo and the name. We all think that's awesome. And I just want to say that we've unfortunately come to the end of the event, but thank you so much to Ryan for sharing your expertise with us today. We really appreciate it. If anyone would like to check out Ryan's podcast or follow him on social, the links are going to be posted in the chat for you now. And on behalf of the AC Hub, we want to give all attendees a huge thank you for participating in today's AC Always Connected event. We are recording this session, so if anyone's looking to rewatch this session, we'll post the link in the chat. And our next upcoming AC Always Connected virtual event is tomorrow, and it's the Top Chef Canada Experience Inside Scoop. So tomorrow at noon, and the details can be found on the AC Hub Student Support Services website. We're going to post a link in the chat for that as well. So thank you again, Ryan. Thank you again, everyone. We look forward to seeing you at our event tomorrow.
thanks. Yeah, see ya.